Hi everyone, welcome back to the channel. I'm Sharice and I have a whole teacher kind of studious action setup for you today. I feel like a teacher, and that is because I will be actually teaching you some things, not really high level things, but some beginner things. So I've been getting this question quite a lot. How did you start to sew your own clothing? And really and truly, I just jumped headfirst into it. I started sewing my own clothing last year and I have continued on, and I think it's one of the most liberating things that I have done. Sew my own clothes. I know it sounds weird, but there's power in being able to do something yourself. So because I've been getting this question so much, I felt that I should make an in-depth video about it. And so today is going to be an in-depth video, an in-depth beginner video on how to start sewing. You can sew your own clothing, your own home decor accessories, your own accessories, just about anything. So I'm going to start with the very basics, just so you can get a grasp of everything that you need to become comfortable. And then, from there, the sky is the limit, like they say. So first things first, I am going to give you a little background on how I got started sewing. So when I was a child, maybe about, I would say 12-ish, I took some sewing classes at a local sewing school called Simplicity. And I didn't take too many classes, but I remember taking about at least 4 classes. And in those classes are where I learned about the sewing machine, how to thread, the different tools needed, and I even sewed a few pieces. Like I sewed a pajama piece, just some little accessories, and that was just about it. And it was the most fun I had as a child that I can remember, because I really enjoy doing things with my hands. Sadly, I did not continue because I think the issue is I didn't have a ride on Saturdays. No one wanted to drop me to sewing classes, so that was quite short-lived. So from the age of 12 to the age of 30 something, there's just this big long gap of no sewing. So I knew nothing between those ages. And then comes the pandemic, and then we're locked in the house. I decided to buy a sewing machine, and I just started to relearn all of the concepts that I would have learned as a child. So I purchased a refurbished machine off of the internet, and I started to sew again. And so that is my journey into sewing. So it's nothing groundbreaking. I didn't go to some fashion institute. I didn't have anyone around me that was a tailor, a seamstress. I just simply jumped headfirst into it. The pandemic gave me a good opportunity to relearn a hobby that's very useful, that helped me to start a business, that helped me to find a really good hobby. So that is how I started sewing. Okay, so we're going to get into the good stuff now. We're going to be getting into sewing supplies. Just about everything you're going to need to start sewing is on this list. So if you want to write these down, you can write them down, but I think I'll just include them in the description box, or you can find this just about anywhere. So what do you need to get started sewing? Of course, you're going to need a sewing machine. I have a Singer heavy duty machine, and this isn't what I started off with. I started off with a refurbished sewing machine just because I wasn't sure I was going to commit to the whole idea of sewing. So I just got it was like $100 and something, and I started to sew with that. And I started a mass business during the pandemic, and I worked that machine so hard till it stopped working. And so I had to replace it. And I was like, well, let me just get a heavy duty machine one time. I had made a few dollars from doing what I was doing, and I just reinvested that into a really good sewing machine. So the first thing you're gonna need is a sewing machine, duh. But please don't invest in any expensive piece of sewing machine. If your mom has one, if your grandma has one, if your friend has one, if a thrift shop has one, get something that you won't have to spend a lot of money on, something that you'll just play around with until you find that this is something that you want to do and you're committed to it, and then you can upgrade as time goes by. So the first thing first is a sewing machine. You're going to need scissors, of course. You're going to need fabric scissors, and you're going to need paper scissors. You don't want to cut anything else with your fabric scissors, because you run the risk of making them become dull, and then you're just going to have to buy a new one. So have fabric scissors and then have paper scissors. You're going to need Well, you might not need this, but this is a rotary cutter, something that I found essential while I was making masks because I was producing so many and I wanted to cut through so many layers of fabric. I bought something called a rotary cutter. It's like a pizza cutter for fabric, and it is extremely sharp. So if you're not really good at cutting things, don't use this. Because you're going to need a few other tools in order to use this properly so you don't cut through your entire house. You're going to need a self-healing mat as well as a ruler if you're going to buy a rotary cutter. So you can kind of leave that off the list for now. Next, you're going to need a seam ripper. This is my best friend. Your seam ripper will be your best friend because you will make mistakes when you're sewing and you're going to need to unpick those seams, and this is the fastest way to do so. So please get yourself a really good seam ripper. The next thing you're going to need is something to mark your fabric with, to notate different points where you're going to line up your fabric, something called notches. You're going to need to mark your fabric. A lot of people use tailor's chalk. I decided to use a pen, a disappearing pen. So I would make marks on my fabric and then use an iron to take those marks out when I'm done. Very essential. I love it. Got it from Amazon. I will link it in the description box. This is called Madam Sew. I love it. I swear by it. The next thing you're going to need is a ruler, something to, of course, also get your measurements right. You can find one of these. I think it's called like a gauge, or I don't know, some type of ruler. It came in a sewing kit. I use this to mark my seam allowances, make sure my measurements are right because I'm not the greatest at math, so I need a little help. After your ruler, of course, you're going to need your trusty tape measure, this thing right here, to measure your measurements. Take your measurements, make sure your garments are fitting right. Get yourself a good tape measure. After that, you're going to need pins, clips to secure your fabric together before you sew them. Then you're going to need needles. You're going to need needles for your sewing machine, as well as hand needles if you want to finish off different projects that can't be finished off on your sewing machine. With needles, just want to make a little note. I use needles, whatever I can get my hands on. I use Singer needles or Schmetz needles, and I get universal ones that you can sew just about anything with. So as a beginner, just buy universal needles. I think that's, yeah, just buy universal needles. After that, you're going to need some thread, polyester thread to match whatever fabric you're going to be using. I suggest you buy quite a bit because they're going to run out quite a bit. So next, of course, you're going to need fabric. As a beginner, please start off with woven fabric, which is non-stretch fabric. It's going to be easier for you to work with, and it's just going to make your life a little easier. So woven fabric is the trick. So the next thing that you're going to need, of course, is your patterns. These, in my opinion, from the bigger companies are very, very difficult to sew with. This is just my opinion now, and I am speaking as a beginner, someone who started off recently. I think that the big paper pattern companies are very not beginner friendly. Sorry guys. I find that the instructions are really difficult to follow, and that's why I am a indie pattern girl. I love indie patterns. After patterns, you want a loop turner that helps you to turn your strap. Like if you have thin straps, it helps you to turn it on the right side. Then you're going to need an iron, of course, to press your seams to make it look good, make it look nice, not janky. After that, you're going to need a safety pin also to turn things in and out. Just, this is the janky way to do things. If not, you can use something called a bodkin. Helps you to insert elastics, just makes life a little more easier. After that, you're going to need pinking shears. Pinking shears are going to be your best friend if you do not own a serger, and if you're a beginner, I highly doubt you're going to own a serger. So this right here is, it's a scissor with a, I would say, a serrated edge. Is it serrated or is it like a zigzag edge? And this is going to help you finish off your seams so they won't fray when you wash things. For me, I love using a serger, but this works perfectly. Other than that, you're going to need bobbins, of course. Bobbins are these little plastic things that your thread is threaded on to help you sew. So yeah, that is the end of my beginner sewing supplies list. I hope you guys made notations. Again, I'll have it in the description box. So those are all the necessary tools you'll need to get sewing immediately. So next, we're going to discuss patterns. And I touched a little on this. Okay, so when I got into sewing, I did not necessarily like the patterns from the big paper companies. I found them very difficult to read. I found that the styles were a little outdated for me, and I just wasn't interested. A friend of mine put me onto paper patterns and the different paper company, the different indie companies that create patterns, and so I find it to be a very great place for you to start looking for patterns. And so I'm going to give you a list of indie pattern makers. So, you know what? Back it up. What is a paper pattern? A paper pattern from an indie company is a pattern that you're able to download and you can print them off at home and put them together. So to be honest, it's a bit of work. I absolutely hate printing and putting patterns together, but it saves me a lot of money and it saves me on a lot of stress, because indie pattern makers, in my opinion, their instructions are so succinct. Like if you are literally just starting your sewing journey, you will find it so easy. Like I find the big paper companies, pattern paper companies like McCall's and Simplicity, it's like their instructions are like in Spanish to me sometimes. It's like, what are you saying to me? What, and it's just so confusing. So for me, I find that as a beginner, the indie pattern companies will be a better fit for you because of that. The instructions and the directions will be so much easier and the styles are a little more modern. Okay, so some of my top indie pattern makers will be Marsha Styles, Etsy. Etsy is my favorite, one of my favorites. Then you can get free pattern. These ones will be free from Peppermint Magazines. Once a month, I think it is, they put out free patterns, like one free pattern. Very amazing. And then Sewing in the City, I really love her work. Rosary Apparel, you can actually find her on Instagram. She does instructional videos along with her pattern. She's simply amazing. She's from Australia. So She Made, they're my local friends. I get patterns from them. They make me patterns. They're absolutely amazing. I don't think they're selling patterns at the moment, but I couldn't not add them to this list. Next, there's Paradise Patterns. I absolutely love their work. They also do sew along, so it's kind of easier in my opinion when you have a pattern company that brings out a pattern and you can see someone doing it. It's just so much easier. Then we have Chalk and Notion Pattern, and then there's Sewing Patterns by Mason. All of these are very talented pattern makers. You can find them online, Instagram, follow them. I love their patterns. So that is where you can find patterns to start your journey sewing. So moving along, next, where to buy fabric to make your clothes, your accessories, whatever. So I'm going to give you guys a list of my go-to places for buying fabric. Fabric.com, they're an Amazon company. I like them. I love them. But sometimes I feel a little guilty using them because they're such a big company and I feel like, oh, I'm giving you all of my money while I can give to indie companies. So yeah. Next is of course Etsy. Again, you can find a lot of indie companies there. The shipping amazing, the service amazing. Next, Melanated Fabrics. That is a black owned company, so I highly recommend that you support them. Then my local fabric stores. We have, if you're local, there's Commonwealth Fabrics, there is Home Fabrics, there's Quality Fabrics, there's Averils. All of them, they will have something if you just want to go out and find something to start your journey. I do get things from them from time to time, but it's just the selection isn't as great as I want it to be. Next, of course, you have the OGs, Joann's.com. You have the Fabric Store. You have Blackbird Fabrics, they're a Canadian company. I can't purchase from them too much because I find the shipping to be a little expensive for me, but they have a great selection. Then you have your local thrift stores. You have mood.com. Of course, they're a little more pricier, so I wouldn't say to start with them, but they are an option as you grow in your sewing journey. And honestly, the last place is probably the most unconventional place, but I say to start around the house. Use whatever you have. If you have old linens, old sheets, old dresses, old curtains, they can all be invigorated to make dresses, to make tops, to make things around the house. So use what you have until you can get what you want. And so the last part of this video will be some good tips that I have for you when you are beginning your journey to make it a little easier. Some tips that I wish that I had had when I started, and so I'm going to give you those tips right now. My first tip is to choose an easy pattern. When you're getting started sewing, you're going to be a tad ambitious, but I want you to know that the best thing to do is to start really small and slow to give yourself the ability to grow in confidence. When I started so ambitiously with a summer dress, and first of all, the thing couldn't fit me when I was done. It was the ugliest, most hideous thing that I've ever done. And I honestly didn't know half of the techniques that the pattern called for. So my advice to you is to start small, start easy, start slow to gain confidence and to feel like you're really getting somewhere when you start sewing. So if you choose a pattern, ensure that patterns will usually indicate the difficulty on it. So ensure you choose a beginner pattern and then read through the instructions to see if you know how to do all the techniques. So if you find a pattern that says gather this or base this or stay stitch this and you don't know how to do those things, I would suggest you probably move on to something or shelve that project and move on to something that has all of the necessary steps that you know how to do. So next, I would say start with a summer dress, a very basic summer dress, a pajama pants, maybe some drawstring pants, a scrunchie, a pillowcase, a tote bag. All of these will give you the ability to practice sewing and give you the confidence needed to move on to something more splendid or fabulous or just, to grow your skill, something different. Next, start with woven fabrics. So a woven fabric, of course, like I said, is a non-stretch fabric. So my favorite fabrics to use are cotton or linen fabrics because they're easy to sew with. They're very cool. You could do a lot of things with those types of fabrics. You can do dresses, you can do pants. The options are limitless. So don't get too ambitious. Don't try to work with like chamois or silky fabrics because they are very hard to work with. Even though they're woven, they're very hard to work with. So remember, start with like a cotton fabric or linen fabric. With linen is cotton, but you know what I mean, a woven fabric. So the next thing I would say is stay away from the stretch fabrics because stretch fabrics you're going to need a little more skill in order to work with stretch fabrics, and you're going to need to learn how to sew with a zigzag stitch, or you're probably going to need a serger. So my advice is to start with perhaps a cotton fabric or a linen fabric, like I said. My third tip is to take your time. Sewing doesn't have to be a race. Remember, it's a marathon. Take as much time as you need. It's a hobby. It's something that you need to learn how to kind of hit those steps and your targets in order to see the big picture. Take your time, enjoy the process, or you will become overwhelmed. A few months ago, maybe last year, what I used to do is I would try to make as many things as possible, try to really speed sew, and I found myself being overwhelmed. My projects were unfinished and half of them I couldn't wear. They were unwearable because I got just really exhausted in the middle of the projects and didn't do things right, just took a lot of shortcuts. So my advice to you is to take your time, enjoy the process. If you're starting with a printed pattern, you have to print your pattern and assembly it. My advice is to take things one step at a time. So print your pattern, put it together, cut it out, and that's it. That's all you do in that day. The second day you would cut your fabric and then start to sew. And if you reach points of the project where you get a little stuck, take a breather, take a walk, put it off for the next day, but don't try to do it in the spirit, if you're in a spirit of frustration, because that will only kind of throw you off. So that's what I found that I do now. I would take my time, I would print, I would just kind of earmark certain days where I'm going to do certain parts of the project, and that has saved me a lot of grief by just taking my time and just realizing that this is supposed to be fun. I want to have fun with this, and I want things to be done properly, so I'm going to take my time. And my fourth tip is, I have 2 more tips for you. My fourth tip is practice makes perfect. So when I find a pattern that I really like, I make that pattern maybe about 6 times until I perfect it. So going into sewing, a lot of things aren't going to be perfect. It's going to take you some time to perfect techniques. Like right now, I have been trying to perfect the technique of gathering for a year. I'm so embarrassed to say I'm still nowhere near perfect doing that. But every project that I do, I try to learn a little more. I try to just continue practicing until it's perfect. That one ain't perfect yet, but now I've perfected certain things like attaching a facing, ensuring that my sleeves are right, making sure my hemline is straight. So all these things took me time to learn how to do. So again, the sewing is not a race. Well, it is a race. No. What am I trying to say? Sewing is a marathon. You know, there's going to be different legs that you're going to need to run, and just take your time with it. So my 5th and final tip for you as a beginner is to find support. I don't think I would be as confident or as far along in my sewing journey if I didn't have a support group of people, to support me in my endeavors. Like, I have friends here in the sewing community that are absolutely amazing. They've taught me techniques, they've given me fabric, they've given me advice, they've encouraged me to continue going on when I've like absolutely ruined things and like say I'm not this, I can't sew and I hate it and blah blah blah. They've given me my sewing, like they've put a battery in my back and say like, you know, keep going, and this is just a process and you'll get through it. So please find a support group of people that love to sew, that can give you advice, you can hang out with, that you can do sew-alongs with. I find it to be extremely helpful. The YouTube sewing community as well as the Instagram sewing community are very helpful, very friendly, very forthcoming. They will give you tips, they'll give you secrets, and honestly, I don't think I would, again, I'm going to say it again, I don't think I'd be where I am if it wasn't for, you know, my sewing tribe. So please find yourself some people who are like-minded and will help you along the way. So I think those are my tips. That's my advice, my everything that I wanted to tell you guys. I think I've finished. We've touched on how I got started, the basic supplies, patterns, shopping for fabric, tips for starting, how to sew, all of that good stuff. So this is where I'm gonna leave you, so you can gather your supplies, buy your fabric, and buy your patterns, and just dive head first into the world of sewing your own clothing, your own decor, your own accessories, and just making sewing a very fun hobby. So if you want to see more videos like this, please don't forget to give me a thumbs up. Leave me some messages in the comments letting me know what other beginner tips you'd like to know, anything. Just let me know and I will be here to help you and guide you along your way as a beginner. Remember, I still look at myself as a beginner in a way. I feel like maybe I'm intermediate, but I'm still learning, I'm still growing, and any way that I can help someone else, I would be truly down for it. So that is going to do it for this video. Thank you guys for watching. Thank you for supporting the channel, and I will see you right back here for another video.